Amy Turner packed her backpack for a solo trek through Grand Teton's most scenic canyons and vanished like morning mist. Her father spent every weekend searching the mountains, refusing to give up hope, while search teams found nothing but empty wilderness and fading trails. But nearly a year later, a ranger studying golden eagles made a discovery perched on a narrow mountain ledge that would shatter everything investigators believed and expose a nightmare hiding in America's most beautiful mountains. The Grand Tetons are uncompromising. They rise from the valley floor of Jackson Hole without prelude, a violent, jagged assertion of granite against the Wyoming sky. There are no foothills to soften their ascent. They are simply there, ancient, sharp, and profoundly indifferent. For centuries, people have come here to test themselves, find solace, or capture a sliver of its raw magnificence. In the summer of 2023, a young woman named Amelia Turner came for all three reasons. Amelia, or Amy as everyone called her, was 24 years old. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent more time in the wild than in crowded rooms. A year before, she had settled in Jackson, trading a promising but unfulfilling career in graphic design for a small apartment, a part-time job at a local gear shop, and a front-row seat to the mountains that captivated her since childhood. Her apartment was a testament to her passion. Topographic maps of the Teton Range were pinned to the walls, crisscrossed with pencil lines marking past and future routes. Her own photographs hung beside them, a bull moose silhouetted in the morning mist of the Snake River, the fiery alpenglow on the Middle Teton, the delicate petals of a sky pilot flower clinging to a rocky ledge above the treeline. Friends and family would later describe her as meticulous, almost reverently so. She wasn't a daredevil or a thrill-seeker. She was an artist and a student of the wilderness. Her respect for the mountains was palpable. She understood that they demanded preparation, humility, and a keen awareness of one's own limits. She was a seasoned solo hiker, finding a unique clarity in the solitude of the backcountry, a place where the only sounds were the wind, her own breathing, and the shudder of her camera. That camera, a well-loved Nikon D750, was her most prized possession, a tool for translating the profound feelings the wilderness evoked in her into something tangible. For weeks, she had been planning her most ambitious solo trip yet, a 4-day, 3-night trek along the formidable Paintbrush Canyon Cascade Canyon route. It was a classic Teton route, but a strenuous one, covering roughly 20 miles of punishing elevation gain, exposed ridges, and breathtaking vistas. For Amy, it was more than just a hike, it was a pilgrimage. It was a chance to push her skills, to immerse herself completely, and to capture a portfolio of images she hoped would be the cornerstone of her first gallery show. Her roommate, Chloe, would later recall Amy spreading her maps across the living room floor, her face illuminated by a headlamp as she traced the path with her finger, her expression one of focused joy. She was looking for the perfect Teton sunrise, Chloe said. She believed if she could just get high enough into Paintbrush Divide at the right moment, she could capture something no one else had. The days leading up to her departure were a quiet ritual of preparation. Her mother, Sarah, speaking to investigators later, remembered their final video call. Amy's face was bright with anticipation as she showed off her neatly organized gear laid out on her apartment floor. Her worn-in blue Osprey backpack, her lightweight tent, her down sleeping bag, and her tiny cook stove. She held up her satellite messenger, a Garmin inReach, and promised she'd send check-in messages each evening. She was so prepared, so responsible, Sarah recounted, her voice thick with raw grief. She had her food portioned into Ziploc bags, each one labeled by day. She had her first aid kit, her water filter, and extra batteries for her camera. There wasn't a single detail she overlooked. This meticulous nature, this deep-seated competence, is what would later make her disappearance so utterly incomprehensible. She wasn't the kind of person to make a simple mistake. On the morning of Friday, August 12, 2023, Amy's silver Subaru pulled into the bustling String Lake Trailhead parking lot. The air was cool and sharp, smelling of pine and damp earth. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. It was a perfect day. Before shouldering her pack, she spotted an older couple admiring the view of the cathedral group reflected in the still water. She approached them with a warm smile and asked if they wouldn't mind taking a photo of her. The man, a tourist from Ohio named Gerald, happily obliged. He took the photo that would soon become the most widely circulated image of Amy. A young woman full of life, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, a pink tank top bright against the deep green of the forest. She holds a black hiking pole in one hand, her heavy pack settled on her shoulders, and behind her, the Tetons loom, majestic and serene. She thanked the couple, her smile genuine. They would later tell rangers that she seemed incredibly happy, almost glowing with excitement. She told us she was heading up into Paintbrush Canyon, the wife, Eleanor, recalled. She said she felt like the luckiest person in the world to have this in her backyard. After they parted ways, Amy found a quiet spot by the shore, took a deep breath of mountain air, and sent the photo to her mother. The accompanying text was the last message anyone would ever receive from her. It read, "Off I go. The mountains are calling. Weather is perfect. Talk to you Sunday night." With that, she turned, adjusted her straps, and walked toward the trailhead, disappearing into the shadows of the lodgepole pines, a lone figure stepping into the vast, waiting wilderness. Sunday came and the sun set behind the jagged peaks, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. In her home in Salt Lake City, Sarah Turner checked her phone, expecting the familiar buzz of a text from her daughter. When 9 p.m. passed with no word, she felt the first flicker of unease but quickly suppressed it. Amy was experienced. Maybe her satellite messenger had lost its charge. Maybe she'd met other hikers and decided to camp with them an extra night. There were a dozen logical explanations. But by Monday evening, the logic had frayed, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The silence from the mountains felt heavy, suffocating. Every unanswered call went to voicemail, the cheerful recording of Amy's voice a gut-wrenching echo of the daughter she couldn't reach. Every text message remained unread, a single gray check mark suspended in an abyss of uncertainty. Sarah knew her daughter. Amy was disciplined. She was considerate. She would never intentionally cause this kind of worry. Something was wrong. At 7:15 p.m. on Monday, with her hands trembling so badly she could barely dial, Sarah Turner contacted the Teton County Sheriff's Office. She explained the situation calmly at first, her voice steady, but it broke as she gave the dispatcher Amy's name and her planned route. Within the hour, the National Park Service was notified. A ranger was dispatched to the String Lake trailhead to confirm the presence of her vehicle. As the moon rose over the silent, unyielding peaks of the Tetons, Amelia Turner was officially declared a missing person. Her name transformed from that of a vibrant young woman into a case file, a search grid, and a question whispered into the vast, indifferent wilderness. The official response began not with panic, but with procedure. By first light on Tuesday morning, Park Ranger Tom Albright, a man whose face was as weathered as the granite peaks he patrolled, was standing beside Amelia Turner's silver Subaru. The String Lake trailhead, so vibrant with hikers just days before, was now quiet, holding the cool stillness of dawn. A fine film of ochre dust and pollen had settled on the car's windshield, a silent testament to the days it had sat unmoved. Albright peered inside. A half-empty travel mug sat in the console. A folded map of the park lay on the passenger seat. Everything looked normal, which was precisely what felt so wrong. A quick check of the trail register inside the metal box at the trailhead confirmed her entry. Amelia Turner, Paintbrush Cascade Loop, 3 nights. Expected return Sunday. There was no corresponding sign-out. In his 20 years with the Park Service, Albright had seen this scenario dozens of times. Most ended with a sheepish hiker emerging from the trail a day or two late, full of apologies and stories of a missed turn or a beautiful view that held them captive. But as he radioed in his findings, a knot of professional concern tightened in his gut. By 8 a.m., that concern had escalated into a full-scale search and rescue operation. The Teton Interagency SAR team assembled at a makeshift command post near Jenny Lake. The air buzzed with controlled urgency, the clatter of climbing gear, the murmur of low voices over radios, and the scent of strong coffee mixing with pine. Lead Ranger Mike Connolly, a man with a calm demeanor that belied the immense pressure of his job, stood before a massive topographic map pinned to a board. The Paintbrush Cascade Loop was outlined in a stark red line, a 20-mile thread winding through some of the most unforgiving terrain in the lower 48. "Okay, people," Connolly began, his voice cutting through the morning chatter. "Our subject is Amelia Turner, 24, experienced solo hiker, well-equipped. Her plan was to camp near Holly Lake on night 1. That's our primary target." Teams were divided. Ground crews would hike the loop from both directions. K-9 units would be airlifted to higher elevations to work their way down. A helicopter was already in the air, its rhythmic whump-whump a familiar heartbeat in the valley during times of crisis. The first major break
So,
and the first deep
yeah,
mystery
good.
came just after noon. A ground team pushing up the steep switchbacks of Paintbrush Canyon spotted it. A small dome tent, its muted green fabric a tiny patch of artificiality against the wild tapestry of the subalpine forest. It was Amy's campsite, located in a sheltered grove of firs a short walk from Holly Lake, exactly where her plan said it would be. But the scene was deeply unsettling. The tent was perfectly pitched, the stakes driven firmly into the ground. Inside, her sleeping pad was unrolled, and next to it sat her small, lightweight day pack. It contained only an empty water bottle, a wrapper from a protein bar, and a tube of sunscreen. Her main backpack, the heavy Osprey pack containing her sleeping bag, food, and survival gear, was gone. Her hiking boots were also missing. The scene painted a bizarre picture. It suggested she had set up her tent, her shelter for the night, and then, for some unknown reason, had put on her boots, shouldered her heavy multi-day pack, and walked away, leaving the lighter day pack behind. It made no sense. Hikers might leave their main pack at camp to take a short day hike, but they wouldn't leave their day pack behind. It was a fundamental contradiction of backcountry logic, and it sent a chill through the search team. The discovery prompted the immediate deployment of the K-9 units to the campsite. A German shepherd named Kaiser, the team's most experienced dog, was brought to the tent flap. After a moment of sniffing the ground, he let out a low whine and took off, his handler jogging to keep up. Kaiser picked up a scent trail immediately, but it didn't follow the established path. Instead, it led directly away from the trail, up a steep, scree-covered slope, choked with dense willows and deadfall. The team followed, the terrain growing more difficult with every step. After a grueling half-mile climb, the trail arrived at a jumble of massive granite boulders and tangled, impassable deadfall. And there Kaiser stopped. He circled the area, sniffing frantically, his tail low. He whined, looked back at his handler, and then sat. The trail was gone. Not faded, not lost. It simply ceased to exist, as if Amy had been lifted straight into the air. The handler radioed back to command, his voice laced with frustration. The scent terminates here. It just stops. There's nowhere to go. While the K-9 teams hit a wall, other rangers worked to track down the Ohio couple who had taken Amy's last photo. They found them at a hotel in Jackson, preparing to fly home. Eleanor and Gerald were heartbroken to hear the news and eagerly shared what little they knew. They confirmed Amy's cheerful demeanor and her excitement. Then Eleanor remembered something else. "About 10 minutes after we left her," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We passed another hiker on the trail, a man. He was alone, too." Gerald nodded in agreement. He was an intense-looking fellow, military-style pack, old and faded. He didn't make eye contact, just kept his eyes fixed forward. Didn't return our greeting, just had a hard, weathered look about him. The description was vague, but in the absence of other leads, it became a focal point. A forensic sketch artist was brought in, and based on the couple's memory, a composite drawing was created. A man in his late 30s or early 40s with a gaunt face, deep-set eyes, and a grim expression. The intense hiker became a ghost haunting the investigation, a potential witness or something more sinister. But with no name and no other sightings, he remained just that, a sketch on a piece of paper. High above, the search helicopter continued its slow, methodical grid patterns. From the air, the vastness of the Tetons was both beautiful and terrifying. The dense summer canopy of the forest formed an unbroken sea of green, swallowing the ground below. The canyons were deep, shadowed gashes in the earth, their sheer walls creating countless blind spots where a person could lie unseen forever. The pilot and spotters scanned relentlessly for a flash of color, a piece of gear, the glint of metal, but the wilderness held its secrets tightly. The landscape that Amy had found so inspiring had become an accomplice in her disappearance, its scale and complexity working against the very people trying to find her. The final blow to the initial search effort came on the 5th day. The clear blue skies that had marked the beginning of the week vanished, replaced by a bruised purple-gray ceiling of cloud that rolled in from the west. The temperature dropped. The rumble of distant thunder echoed through the canyons, growing steadily closer until the storm broke with a terrifying fury. Lightning spiderwebbed across the sky and sheets of cold, driving rain hammered the mountainside. With crew safety at risk, the search was called off. For 36 agonizing hours, no one was in the field while the storm raged on. Everyone understood the implications. Any scent trails would be gone, faint footprints washed away, and the already treacherous ground would become a slick and dangerous morass. It was as if the mountains themselves were determined to erase the last traces of Amelia Turner. After 10 days, the search had turned up nothing more than her abandoned tent and a scent trail that led to a dead end. With human and financial resources stretched to their limit, a weary Mike Connolly made the dreaded call at the evening briefing on the 10th day. The large-scale active search was being suspended. It would transition to a limited continuous patrol, a bureaucratic phrase that meant the chances of finding Amy alive were now considered slim to none. The command post was dismantled, and the volunteers went home. A heavy silence settled over the operation. Amy's parents, who had been keeping vigil in Jackson, were devastated. Her father, Mark, a quiet land surveyor, stood alone in the now empty briefing room, staring at the map. He looked at the red line marking his daughter's path and the vast empty wilderness around it. The official search may have been over, but for him, it was just beginning. The seasons in the Tetons changed with a brutal, indifferent beauty. The vibrant greens of summer bled into the fiery golds and reds of autumn, a fleeting spectacle of color. Then, the fire was quickly extinguished by the first snows of October. The peaks disappeared behind a gray veil, and a deep, profound silence settled over the range. It was the silence of winter, a quiet that felt ancient and absolute. With this seasonal shift, the memory of Amelia Turner began to fade, crystallizing into a colder, harder story, a ghost, a cautionary tale. The missing person posters, once stark and urgent, began to curl at the edges in the visitor center, their colors bleached by the relentless high-altitude sun. Amy's case file, now at the Park Service headquarters, grew thicker with reports and dead-end leads, yet paradoxically felt colder to the touch. The investigation was officially inactive. Her name joined a somber list of those the mountains had claimed, individuals absorbed by the wilderness, leaving behind only questions and an ache in the hearts of those who loved them. For the rangers and locals in Jackson, her story became a piece of folklore, whispered to new seasonal workers and overcautious tourists. The talented photographer who walked into Paintbrush Canyon and never came out. But for one person, the case never went cold. Mark Turner, Amy's father, refused to let the silence win. A retired land surveyor, Mark was a man of quiet precision, someone who had spent his life translating the chaotic contours of the earth onto a logical grid. He couldn't comprehend a world where his daughter, a fixed and brilliant point in his own life, could be erased without a trace. While the official search relied on broad sweeps and probability, Mark's approach was obsessive and granular. He sold a small parcel of land to fund his private search, trading a comfortable retirement for a solitary, grief-fueled mission. His weekends became a grim ritual. He'd drive for hours from Salt Lake City to Jackson, his old Ford F-150 loaded with surveying gear and supplies. He became a familiar, haunted figure to the park rangers. They'd see his truck at remote trailheads long before sunrise and long after sunset. They treated him with a gentle, pained respect, offering him coffee and quiet words of caution about the weather. They knew he was searching for a ghost, but they also recognized a father's refusal to surrender in his methodical desperation. He didn't wander aimlessly. He applied the discipline of his profession to his grief. He created his own high-resolution topographic maps, overlaying satellite imagery with geological data, and dividing the vast wilderness into small, manageable quadrants. He would spend entire days meticulously searching a single tiny square of his grid, a steep drainage or a dense thicket that the official search had only glanced at from a helicopter. He was looking for an anomaly, a depression in the soil, a piece of colored fabric, anything that broke the natural pattern. He found nothing, but with every empty quadrant he crossed off his map, his resolve only hardened. The search was no longer about finding Amy alive. It was about bringing her home. As Mark Turner combed the silent, frozen ground, a different kind of search was raging in the digital world. On true crime subreddits and hiking forums, Amy's case became a source of endless debate. Armchair detectives from around the world dissected every known detail. The most prevalent theory, favored by authorities, was a simple, tragic accident. She had slipped on a loose rock and fallen to a place hidden from view, a deep crevice or dense undergrowth that searchers had missed. Others, drawn to more sensational possibilities, argued for an animal attack. A grizzly bear or mountain lion could have ambushed a lone hiker. But the lack of physical evidence, no blood, no torn clothing, made this theory hard to sustain. A more psychologically complex narrative also emerged, that Amy had chosen to disappear. Sleuths pointed to lines from her journals, which her family had shared in desperation, speaking of her need for solitude and feeling unmoored from her old life. They twisted her love for the wilderness into a desire to escape society, suggesting she had orchestrated her own vanishing. But it was the threat of foul play that proved most compelling. The intense hiker, the man with the gaunt face and military pack, became a central figure in the online mythology. He was given nicknames, the Teton Phantom, Cascade Creek John Doe. Without a name or any evidence, he became a blank canvas for 1,000 dark narratives. Was he a predator who stalked lone female hikers? Had he followed Amy from the trailhead? The lack of answers only fueled speculation, turning the unknown man into a legendary boogeyman of the Tetons. For months, there was nothing. Mark continued his lonely searches, and the online forums continued their circular debates. Then in late August 2024, a breakthrough came, or so it seemed. A fly fisherman navigating a remote section of Cascade Creek, several miles downstream from the main search area, spotted something glinting under the water, wedged between two large rocks. He waded in and pulled it free. It was a single black Lecky hiking pole, its grip worn and its tip scratched. He recognized the brand as a popular choice for serious hikers and, remembering the posters for the missing photographer, dutifully reported his find. The discovery sent an electric jolt through the cold case. Investigators confirmed the pole was the exact model and brand seen in Amy's last photograph. Her parents were notified, their hopes painfully rekindled. A targeted search team was even dispatched to the area where the pole was found. But the hope was short-lived. Hydrologists explained that in a watershed as powerful as the Tetons, the pole could have washed downstream for miles, dislodged from a high mountain slope by heavy spring runoff. It was a tangible piece of Amy's presence, a heartbreaking echo of her last day, but it provided no specific location, no new direction. The clue, like the scent trail the dogs had followed, led nowhere. It was a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit, a frustrating fragment that only deepened the sense of a vast, unknowable void. The mountains had given up one small secret, only to pull the silence in more tightly around the rest. The summer of 2024 settled into the high country, bringing the familiar cycle of life. Wildflowers exploded in a riot of color. Marmots sunned themselves on warm granite slabs, and the great birds of prey rode the thermal updrafts, their sharp eyes scanning the terrain below. Among these winged hunters was a man whose passion would inadvertently cut through a year of cold silence. Ranger David Chun was a 15-year veteran of the National Park Service, a man whose quiet demeanor and encyclopedic knowledge of the local ecosystem had earned him immense respect. But his official duties were secondary to his true calling, ornithology. Specifically, he was a lead researcher monitoring the golden eagle population. In late July, 11 months after Amelia Turner had vanished, David was conducting his annual survey of nesting sites. This work took him far from the trails and crowded overlooks into the rugged, untrodden heart of the Teton Range. He was in a remote high-altitude basin, a place of sweeping scree slopes and sheer cliff faces that few humans ever saw. He moved with the practiced ease of someone at home in the vertical world, his binoculars a permanent extension of his eyes. From a ridge, he scanned a distant cliffside, a known nesting area. Through his high-powered lenses, he quickly located a massive, sprawling nest of sticks and branches perched precariously on a grassy ledge. It was a classic golden eagle eyrie. But as he focused, something caught his eye. Mixed in with the natural browns and grays were flashes of incongruous color, a scrap of bright red and a patch of vibrant turquoise. His first thought was trash. Concerned that debris could harm the eagles, David decided to climb up and clean the nest. The climb was grueling, with loose scree shifting under his boots. He moved slowly and deliberately, testing each handhold. As he drew closer, his initial annoyance at thoughtless hikers curdled into a chilling unease. The colors were more distinct now. The red wasn't a plastic bag, and the turquoise wasn't a piece of rope. He pulled himself onto the ledge, his heart pounding from both exertion and a sudden, inexplicable dread. He stood before the nest, a chaotic masterpiece nearly 5 feet across. And there, woven into its very fabric, were the items he had seen from below. The turquoise was a tattered piece of nylon, clearly ripped from outdoor gear like a stuffed sack or a rain cover. And the red was the trim on a dirty, weathered pair of women's underwear. In that instant, David Chen's mind flashed back to the missing person posters and the face of the smiling young photographer. He remembered the photo of Amy at the trailhead, her blue backpack accented with bright red straps. The color was a near-perfect match. His blood ran cold. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that this was not random trash. This was a clue. He backed away from the nest slowly, his mind racing. He pulled out his phone and, with trembling hands, began taking photos. He didn't touch anything, knowing this was now potential evidence. His voice tight and strained, he radioed his supervisor. "Dispatch, this is Chun. I'm at the nesting site in the upper basin. I may have found something related to the Turner case." The news ripped through the ranger station like a lightning strike. The quiet, stagnant cold case was suddenly, shockingly alive. When David returned with the carefully bagged items, investigators immediately pulled Amelia Turner's file. They laid the grimy underwear on a sterile cloth next to a high-resolution printout of Amy's last photo. The shade of red was a startlingly precise match to the red accent straps on her Osprey backpack. A grim silence fell over the room as a new, horrific theory began to take shape, whispered between seasoned investigators who understood the unsentimental logic of the wild. Golden eagles are predators, but they are also scavengers. They are drawn to carrion, to the scent of death. The most plausible and disturbing explanation was that an eagle had been drawn to the scent of blood on Amy's body or on clothing discarded nearby. It had landed, torn at the fabric, and carried a piece away, a bright, durable scrap perfect for reinforcing its nest. This single bizarre discovery transformed the entire investigation. It meant that Amy hadn't just fallen into a random crevice somewhere in the park's vastness. It meant her body, or what was left of it, was almost certainly located somewhere on or very near that remote, inaccessible hillside. The search was no longer a needle-in-a-haystack operation across hundreds of square miles. It was now a laser-focused grid. Based on the eagle's nesting instinct, the Park Service authorized a new, highly targeted search. They weren't looking for a missing person anymore. They were looking for a grave. The catalyst had been found not by human eyes or technology, but by the ancient predatory instinct of a bird, a silent witness that had unwittingly carried a message from the dead back into the world of the living. The new search began with a somber, surgical precision that stood in stark contrast to the sprawling, hopeful efforts of the year before. This was not a rescue mission. It was a recovery. A specialized team was assembled, a grim fellowship of experts whose skills were called upon when the worst was suspected. Forensic anthropologists, accustomed to reading stories from bone, flew in. They were joined by the state's top cadaver dog teams and seasoned members of Teton County Search and Rescue who specialized in high-angle recovery. The search and rescue team was airdropped into a basin below the eagle's nest. The helicopter's blades whipped the air, creating a frantic, unnatural wind that swept across the alpine meadows. A heavy tension hung in the air, a combination of the thin mountain oxygen and the shared weight of their mission. They were on hallowed ground, a place of immense beauty that was now the stage for a human tragedy. The search area was a small 1-square-mile grid, but the terrain was brutally difficult. The slopes below the nest were a dangerous mix of steep grass, loose scree that shifted like marbles, and jagged rock outcroppings. The team moved slowly and carefully in a grid pattern. The search dogs, their senses far sharper than any humans, worked back and forth, their handlers giving soft commands. For 2 days, they found nothing but the mountain's silence. The sun beat down on them, and the vast landscape seemed to mock their painstaking efforts. But on the third morning, just as a sliver of doubt began to creep into the operation, a black Labrador named Odin gave a clear alert. He stopped near a dense cluster of thorny brush and stunted, wind-warped fir trees at the base of a series of large boulders. He started to whine a low, insistent sound and pawed at the ground. This was his final signal. He had found his target. The team converged on the spot. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Alana Rios knelt and examined the area. To an untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than a patch of disturbed dirt and rocks. But she saw the subtle signs, an unnatural depression in the soil, rocks piled in a way that defied natural erosion. "Start here," she said quietly, pointing to the center of the brush. Slowly, using small trowels and brushes, the team began carefully removing the top layer of soil and rock. It was painstaking work. An hour passed. Then, one of the searchers paused as his trowel scraped against something hard yet yielding. He brushed away the dirt, revealing a piece of faded blue fabric, the sleeve of a technical shirt. A few inches away, another discovery, the unmistakable curve of a human bone. The team worked with renewed, somber intensity. Over the next several hours, they uncovered a shallow grave no more than 2 feet deep. Inside lay skeletal remains. The remains were carefully documented, photographed, and airlifted to the county morgue. Identification was swift. Dental records provided a positive match within 24 hours. The remains belonged to Amelia Turner. When the news reached her parents, it was a complex and devastating blow. The agony of confirmation was mixed with the faintest whisper of relief that she had finally been found. However, the autopsy would reveal a truth far more horrific than a simple hiking accident. Dr. Rios's examination of the bones uncovered multiple fractures, including a significant one on the skull, consistent with severe blunt force trauma. This was not the result of a fall. The injury pattern pointed to a violent assault. Furthermore, trace evidence found with the remains and later analysis confirmed a terrible violation. Amelia had been sexually assaulted before she was murdered. The case file was immediately reclassified. This wasn't a tragic accident, it was a homicide. The confirmation of foul play cast the entire investigation in a terrifying new light. Every assumption had to be re-examined. Investigators dug back into the initial reports, their eyes now searching for malice where they had once looked for misadventure. The one potential lead they had, the vague description of the intense hiker, was suddenly elevated from a curious footnote to the most crucial clue. The composite sketch, once a shot in the dark, was now their only hope. It was re-released to the media, no longer as a person of interest who might have seen something, but as a potential suspect in a brutal murder. The news sent a shock wave through the Jackson community and the wider network of online sleuths who had followed Amy's case. The abstract mystery had become a concrete nightmare. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A woman named Brenda, who worked the front desk at a budget motel in Pinedale, Wyoming, a dusty ranching town about an hour south of Jackson, saw the sketch on a local news broadcast. She stared at it, a jolt of recognition running through her. She had seen that face, the deep-set, vacant eyes, the grim set of his jaw. It was a face she hadn't been able to forget. She immediately called the Teton County Sheriff's tip line. She told them the man in the sketch had stayed at her motel for several weeks the previous summer. He was a loner, paid for his room week to week in cash, and kept to himself. He'd said he was in the area for seasonal construction work. She remembered his name from the ledger, Robert Frazier, and she remembered something else that made her shiver. He had checked out abruptly without a word just a few days after the news of the missing hiker first broke. With a name, the investigation accelerated exponentially. A multi-agency task force dug into Robert Bob Frazier's past. He was a 42-year-old transient with a ghost-like digital footprint, but a sealed juvenile record for a violent assault. He moved from state to state, taking under-the-table construction and ranching jobs, never staying in one place for long. By cross-referencing employment records and contacting labor agencies, they traced his path from Wyoming to Montana. They learned he was currently employed as a ranch hand on a large, isolated property outside of Billings. Armed with a search warrant, a heavily armed team of FBI agents and local sheriff's deputies descended on the ranch at dawn. Frazier was taken completely by surprise and arrested without incident. His demeanor was flat and emotionless. In a dusty, cobweb-filled shed where he stored his meager belongings, investigators found a battered, military-style footlocker secured with a heavy padlock. They pried it open. Inside was a predator's trophy box. There were driver's licenses belonging to 3 different women, assorted pieces of jewelry, a few locks of hair, and other deeply personal items. And at the very bottom, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was a Nikon D750 camera. The serial number was a perfect match for Amelia Turner's. The camera's memory card was the final, damning piece of evidence. At the FBI's Regional Forensics Lab, technicians accessed the files. The first several dozen photos were the beautiful, haunting landscapes Amy had taken on her final hike. But then, the gallery took a nightmarish turn. The last sequence of images had been taken by Frazier. They were a graphic, horrifying documentation of his crime. The photos showed Amy, her face a mask of terror, fighting for her life. They showed the assault. They showed her after she was dead. The images were cold, clinical, and utterly depraved. They were the undeniable confession of a monster, a chilling window into the final terrifying moments of a young woman's life. The interrogation room was a sterile, featureless box, and for hours, it was filled with Robert Frazier's silence. He sat impassively, a block of denial, weathering every question from the 2 investigators, a seasoned FBI agent and a sharp Teton County detective. He offered nothing, his face a vacant mask. He was practiced, confident that without his own words, no conviction was certain. The shift didn't come from a clever question, but from the quiet, methodical presentation of evidence. The FBI agent entered the room carrying a plain manila file folder and sat down. He didn't speak. He simply opened the folder and began laying out a series of glossy photographs on the metal table between them, one by one, in chronological order. The first few were Amy's beautiful landscape shots. Then came the first image Fraser had taken, a distant shot of Amy hiking, unaware she was being watched. The next photo was closer, then another. The investigators laid them out like a storyboard, creating a silent, damning narrative of his stalking. Finally came the images of the assault. They were clinical, brutal, and undeniable. They were placed on the table without comment, the sequence of photos speaking with a voice louder than anyone in the room could. Fraser's gaze followed each photo as it was placed on the table. His denial ceased. The air in the room grew heavy and thick. According to the interrogation transcript, he simply fell silent for 7 full minutes, his eyes fixed on the visual timeline of his crime laid out before him. The only sound was the low hum of the room's ventilation. The investigators waited, letting the weight of the evidence press down on him. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low and even, a matter-of-fact tone that was more chilling than any scream. "That's me," he said, nodding almost imperceptibly toward one of the photos. It wasn't an admission of guilt so much as a statement of fact. The dam was broken. He began to talk, not with remorse, but with a detached narrative control. He admitted seeing Amy at the trailhead and being drawn to her. He described following her from a distance, his predatory instincts honed by years of practice, watching her set up her camp at Holly Lake. He recounted the ambush with cold precision, explaining that he waited until she took a short walk away from her tent to get water. When asked why he killed her, his answer was devoid of any recognizable human emotion. He stated that she fought back with a ferocity he hadn't expected, and he killed her to subdue her. He then calmly described burying her body in the shallow grave and taking her camera as a souvenir of his conquest before hiking out of the park under the cover of darkness. When the detective pressed him for a deeper motive, for the why, Fraser looked at them with his flat, empty eyes and gave the most terrifying answer of all. She shouldn't have been there alone. His confession unspooled a history of violence that connected him to at least 2 other unsolved disappearances of female hikers in the Rocky Mountains. The ghost had a name. The void had an answer. And it was more evil than anyone had imagined. The trial of Robert Fraser was not a lengthy affair. The prosecution, armed with the horrifying photographic evidence from Amy's own camera and Fraser's detailed confession, presented a case that was as airtight as it was sickening. The courtroom in Jackson was packed, a somber assembly of community members, press, and the families of the victims Fraser had left in his wake. Amy's parents, Mark and Sarah, sat in the front row every day, their faces etched with a grief so profound it seemed to absorb all the light in the room. They listened to the clinical descriptions of their daughter's last moments, enduring an agony no parent should ever have to bear. Fraser remained impassive throughout, a black hole of humanity whose eyes revealed nothing. The jury's deliberation was short. He was found guilty on all counts: kidnapping, sexual assault, and first-degree murder. The judge, his voice heavy with condemnation, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that the man who haunted the wild places would spend the rest of his days in a cage of concrete and steel. The discovery of Fraser's trophy box had a ripple effect that extended far beyond the Tetons. The driver's licenses and personal items found alongside Amy's camera were the keys that unlocked other cold cases. One belonged to a 28-year-old woman who had vanished while hiking in Colorado's San Juan Mountains 3 years prior. Another belonged to a 22-year-old college student who disappeared from a trail in Idaho's Sawtooth Wilderness. For years, their families had lived in the same agonizing limbo as the Turners, caught between the faint hope of a return and the knowing fear of the unknown. Now they had answers. Fraser's confession provided the locations of their remains, allowing for their recovery and bringing a painful, long-overdue closure. The investigation revealed him to be a nomadic serial predator, a ghost who moved through the West using the isolation and beauty of the wilderness as his hunting ground. For Mark and Sarah Turner, the verdict brought justice but not peace. The knowledge of what happened to their daughter was a wound that would never fully heal. But in the aftermath, they were finally able to bring Amy home. They held a memorial service not in a church, but at an overlook in the park with the cathedral group standing as silent granite witnesses against the sky. Friends and family shared stories of Amy's vibrant spirit, her infectious laugh, her passion for the mountains. Her father, Mark, spoke last. His voice, usually so quiet, was steady as he addressed the crowd. He spoke of the investigators and the search teams, expressing his profound gratitude. He was hailed as a hero by many, the father whose relentless private search had kept the case from being forgotten. But he deflected the praise. "I just did what any father would do," he said, his eyes fixed on the peaks his daughter had loved so much. "I just wanted to find my little girl." They were able to give Amy a proper burial, a final resting place, and begin the long, arduous journey of grieving, a path with no map and no end. The case of Amelia Turner left an indelible scar on the community of Jackson and on the collective consciousness of those who seek solace in the wild. Her story serves as a chilling and permanent reminder that the dangers of the wilderness are not always elemental. It's not always the storm, the fall, or the bear that one must fear. Sometimes the greatest danger wears a human face and walks the same trails, masking a predatory heart with the anonymity of the backcountry. The majestic beauty of the Tetons remains unchanged. The peaks still catch the first light of dawn. The rivers still run cold and clear, and the forests still hold their deep, ancient secrets. But for those who know Amy's story, the beauty is now tinged with a permanent shadow of caution.